Welcome to week 2 of our Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment course with Evoke. In this week, we will be looking at the second unit of competency, Design and Develop Learning Programs. You'll define parameters of learning programs, apply content and make changes that are necessary with training package updates. And you'll learn how to segment lessons and create time frames, similar to, well, absolutely exactly what I was showing you last week with our training and assessment strategy. And I broke down your weekly module plans over the next 5 and 8 weeks. So, building best practice, you're all going to be trainers and assessors soon. We look, of course, to our training package. And ultimately, what you will need to do for your evidence of competency, we turn to the component, the evidence guide, and we look at the critical aspects. So the evidence of the ability to design, develop and review learning programs, we know it'll be within the VET context, and we've done some work on VET contexts. We prepare and develop 2 learning programs. So we'll be continuing this week with our 2 case studies. Case study 1, we're working with Susan, but also now in the context of Susan being part of the group of learners. So it will be all of you collectively. And that's the focus really today is, the characteristics of you all as a group. And the other one, of course, is John, who will be an individual learner with a completely different characteristic set. So we need to contain differentiated learning program designs, and we'll talk about differentiation. At least one of them must be an entire unit of competency. So we will be breaking down a unit of competency there for Susan, which essentially is going to be quite different to the needs of somebody else who won't have that credit transfer from the teaching degree. So as far as knowledge goes, you'll learn the difference between a learning strategy and a learning program. We'll learn the concept in VET of clustering. Now, just as a brief touch on that, we've already covered quality assurance in week 1, and we looked and downloaded the current legislation. So even though that's repeated here in this unit, you'll understand this concept of clustering in a minute. Also in this unit, there's learning and design principles, but they'll be covered very heavily in one of our other modules. So you'll see where we aren't following performance criterion by performance criterion to the letter, otherwise there'd be a lot of repetition. So we'll explain a little bit more about clustering. We're briefly touching on OH&S, occupational health and safety responsibilities for you as a leader there, as a trainer and assessor with the power of that. But that'll really be elaborated again on in a further unit module. And also we're going to briefly touch on a risk control form. So, element 1, define parameters of the learning program. So we have to clarify the purpose and type of learning program with key stakeholders. That's performance criterion 1.1. And you're welcome to follow along with me. If you want to open up your printed out unit of competency for design and develop learning programs, hopefully you've been able to download that in advance now. And that way you can just keep following along and seeing how the unit has been presented, according to those very specific benchmarked steps. So, so 1.1. Now we need to, I guess, this very closely links in with 1.1 of our previous unit, where we looked at identifying the needs of the learner. So what we're doing now, as we're moving forward into week 2, is creating a bit of VET terminology around that. So your very first question in your questionnaire is about converting that information from last week about Susan's and John's needs into, you know, that more formalised vet language. So, for example, I would suggest to you that, you know, Susan's purpose, or the learning program for Susan's purpose, is to develop vocational competency and vocational skills in vet training and assessment. She doesn't need language literacy and numeracy skills. Look, really, the closest one is point 1 there for her. As far as John goes, he's meeting legislative licensing and registration requirements. He has a licensing requirement for his work. Now, some of you out there, where you were saying it's more as a personal interest thing, you're developing general education. Now, we could say with John that he is also developing his language literacy and numeracy skills, but because his learning program is on forklifts, his main purpose is to meet the licensing requirements. It isn't a course for John on language literacy and numeracy specifically. That's just something that, you know, hopefully will be enhanced if we design the program effectively to meet his need with that. So bottom line is, Susan would be developing vocational competency and John would be meeting licensing requirements. Now, the second portion of that performance criterion is we have to develop that or clarify that purpose with key stakeholders. So on the left-hand side, let's focus on Susan. Now, she is an individual learner as a client, but she's also part of a group of learners. There's 8 of you in this session, and there's a chance there might be some others that join us within this next 10 weeks. So it's a very differentiated group. You know, we have to keep flexible to keep meeting the needs of the group there. Now, other stakeholders are the RTO, which is the VOC, and your tutor, which is myself, and the supervising trainer and assessor, which is James Spargo. Now, as far as the key stakeholders are for John, we've got him as just completely as an individual learner there. There would be his boss, because this has really been driven by his workplace. So the organisation is the client as well. There would be the RTO, which will, for all purposes, say that that's a VOC as well again, and you, who is the trainer and assessor, and the supervising assessor. So let's move on now to training specifications. We need to break this down between the two groups as well. We have to access and confirm the competency standards and other training specifications. So we learnt last week that the competency standards are found there in the training package in the unit of competency. We can break it down. There's all of the performance criterion and how that links with all of the other components, and that's what we have to meet. But there might be some other training specifications that are contextualized for the learner. So let's just go now, if you want to turn to your unit of competency document. I've actually broken down the range statement. So you can see here other training specifications, and I've tried to separate them. Now it says may include, so we don't have to use all of them, just pick the ones that apply to our two different cases. So just looking curriculum specifications all the way down there to regulatory and licensing requirements. So I've actually broken that down for Susan and said that she has training needs, and she has needs for recognised prior learning. She has needs for a credit transfer, and possibly if she works for a VOC in the future or for another RTO, you know, some induction needs as well. There's certainly a few of you here today in this group that are after induction needs. So Sean and Nick, for example, and they already work for a VOC, we've actually identified that them experiencing the Certificate 4 in training assessment is going to further assist them in helping in customer service. So they have induction needs. There is some of the other learners out there that we're already in negotiation with about joining the team in their areas of specialty. So, Kim and Dominic, Wayne, all of our learners here potentially have that induction need. Now for John, he has product specifications. Because we're applying a more generic forklift license situation with him, we need then to work with the stakeholders and access specific training specifications. So we need to then fine-tune his training program specifically for pallet forklifts, but also when we're training him in the workplace, we would need to understand the product that pallet forklift will be lifting, and then understand all of the OH&S, occupational health and safety risks around that. He has organisational work requirements. So Susan and all of you as a learning group have the flexibility of e-learning from home. It's self-paced, whereas John really needs this licence as soon as possible. He has to do it at the workplace, which means that there's restrictions around the time that you as a trainer or assessor can go and attend to him. And also we have to work in with the other stakeholder, John's boss, to make sure that we can be offering the training during downtime. So there's a lot of specifications that are so different between our two case studies here. Now John also has the language literacy and numeracy gap that we need to assist with, or at least work our delivery around to make sure that it's delivered in ways that he can understand it and be able to communicate back. And of course he has the licensing requirements. So we've talked briefly in the introduction about clustering, and just moving on again from John's language literacy and numeracy requirements, that was discussed in 5.2 last week. So we have a definition here from the Department of Education and Training publication, Guidelines for Assessing Competence in VET, from the 2nd edition. So clustering is the process of grouping competencies into combinations which have meaning and purpose related to the work functions and needs in an industry. But let's move on a little bit from that. The characteristics of our target group really help bring in this central idea of clustering. You as a group expect that this is going to be streamlined, that you're going to get it done and dusted. I'm going to join in week 1, by week 8, by week 10, boom, I'm done, my evidence is collected. This is e-learning, I've invested in e-learning, that's your expectation set. So the fact that all of you are working towards that full qualification means that I don't have to break each unit down into each individual performance criterion to be issuing just one statement of attainment for a unit of competency. Because we're all completing the 10 modules, whether it's RPL and credit transfer for some, or working through the whole 10 modules, you will essentially be getting that one qualification at the end, and some statements of attainment along the way. Just getting back to this concept of clustering though, because IBSA has had to design this, if somebody was going to be doing one unit of competency for one statement of attainment, they've had to thoroughly build each of these units in their training package to cover essentially everything that would need to do to stand alone. So the fact that we're now working as a qualification, there would be a lot of repetitive double up on that. So basically, just moving on here, I've taken a few little bites out of the document, and I've actually included that document in your downloads. It's a very lengthy document, so it's not something I expect you to read. It's just some of you, I know, like to elaborate and go much deeper into some information, but certainly at the Certificate 4 level, it is fine just to have these brief, concepts. But repetitious delivery and over-assessment is a common weakness in the quality of delivery and assessment when RTOs take a unit-by-unit approach. So we're not taking a unit-by-unit approach. We are sort of breaking down the units in our course structure, but from now on you're going to start to notice where we'll be pulling out that repetition. So we aren't just repeating that through, and I will make you aware of that when that happens, because it helps you understand how you'll be able to plan for your own clustering. So efficiencies when units are clustered as common knowledge, skills and performance requirements can be identified and addressed together instead of multiple times within each unit. So where I'm finding common knowledge, common skill sets, or performance requirements, and sometimes they're worded differently. But when you've had experience with this, you see that bottom line, they're talking about the same thing, even if they're using different words. So, for example, when we're clarifying the purpose, that's very similar to 1.1 of our first unit, clarifying or identifying the needs. So because I had if you actually go and have a look at your unit now, you can see that the word purpose is bold and italicized. So it meant that I could go to the range statement and understand, all right, well, look, I can take last week's unit where we've looked at the training needs and, create more of a vet terminology around how we're going to speak about that. So it isn't repeating. There was some value in bringing that and enhancing that a little more. So at the beginning of our live session, I will have asked you please to have just taken a minute to do a little quiz there, just to help us. This is another aspect of characteristics to determine your learning style, your dominant learning style. So mine's visual, and it'll be interesting to see what your learning style is, because that's important in developing your learning strategies. So here's an example from this unit where I've identified some repetition there. We're talking about considering the characteristics of you as a learning group. So visually now, this is a way, I've just given an auditory version of that, and I did that on purpose just to gauge or to help you self-reflect as a learner, to see, oh gosh, am I taking notes? I'm going to have to replay this. Had I have listened as a learner and just had that auditory version, it just doesn't stick with me. I need visual, and a lot of people seem to require that visual. So here we go. You can see where I've left in 1.1 because of the purpose. And I should have actually in my link side brought across that range statement definition of purpose. So, that could be improved upon. But we've already accessed the competency standards. You know how to do training.gov.au. So I've been able to cross that one out. Identify language literacy and numeracy. That's been done as well in that 5.2 last week. So I do, however, for auditing purposes, link that across. So 1.2, if I've crossed it out, I have to be able to point back to where I've already taught that. And that was covered in 3.2 performance criterion, 3.3 and 5.1 last week. So that's just a bit of an idea, tapping in again about last week where we link concepts together. We're just extending it now with our I guess we're really mapping it now as well to other units.